Welcome back, you guys. In WFA's Cultured series, we want to have conversations that some might feel are difficult to discuss. And today we are doing just that as our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters continue to face racism and discrimination across the country. Last week, when a gunman killed 8 people, 6 of them women of Asian descent at 3 spas in the Atlanta area, news headlines across the country quickly focused on trying to determine what was the suspect's motive behind the killing. The suspect telling investigators they weren't racially motivated. And that's what we need to discuss. Stephanie Drenka with Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, joining me to have this conversation. Stephanie, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you're an Asian American woman. You're also an expert on trying to achieve racial equity. So I feel like your understanding of this topic is very much enhanced. Now, when we discuss anti-Asian violence, right, this isn't new. What are some stereotypes that have gotten us to this point, especially as it relates to women of Asian descent?
I think one of the first things that we have to discuss with this case is that the narrative that came out, the details, was about the killer having a sex addiction and he was trying to eliminate the temptation. And so I've seen people use that narrative to dismiss the idea that the shooting was motivated by racism because non-Asian victims were also killed. But we have to remember that they were killed inside Asian businesses, which were specifically targeted. And also that when you think of a hate crime, it's not hate in the sense where it's loathing or dislike or distaste for something. The FBI defines hate crime as an offense against a person or property motivated by bias. So bias can be someone's religion, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, and it can be race. And so it's also important to remember that malice is not required for racism to occur. You can be biased implicitly, meaning that you've been so conditioned by external factors like the media or friends and family that you don't even realize you hold those beliefs.
Stephanie, so I want to jump in because I want to make sure that I touch on this when you mentioned those external factors. You know, there are certain words and phrases that have also been used as it relates to COVID-19 and this pandemic. Why has some of that language also been harmful to Asian Americans?
So all of the language that is used around Asian Americans is centered by our otherness. So we are alien, we are perpetual foreigners, and specifically with Asian women, I'm sure you've heard the term yellow fever or Asian fetish. And this might be one of the most insidious forms of racism because it's often conflated with flattery. People will tell you to take it as a compliment, that it's a sign of admiration and not racist. But I liken it to an abusive relationship where someone justifies the harm with love, but really at the core, it's about power and dominance and control. And for Asian women, one of the phrases is China dolls. We're seen as sexually submissive and quiet. And so men like this killer see Asian women as objects that fulfill a fantasy, not as humans. And that dehumanization, that idea that Asians are foreign and a threat. With COVID-19, we saw that with words like the China flu and China virus and Kung flu, and that is weaponized when people are in a state of trauma and they are hurting and suffering and they need a scapegoat. When that language is used in this time, it's like loading bullets into a gun and handing it to someone.
Stephanie, when I posted that we will be having this conversation, you know, I was flooded with questions and comments. One of those, in so many words, talks about anti-Blackness in the Asian American community, even this idea of the model minority. Can you explain what this means and how you would address their concerns as we all try to come together to uplift one another?
The model minority myth is also one of the most dangerous stereotypes, and it is important for people to understand how it was developed. It was created in response to the growing civil rights movement. So it was started out of this fear that Black people were gaining too much power, and it was used to divide us. So Asians were and are used as a racial wedge, and we are weaponized against each other. We see this with affirmative action in college admissions. One of the most notable examples of violent repercussions is the LA riots, where Black and Korean communities were fighting against each other while the white police were protecting the affluent white communities. And there is prevailing anti-Blackness in the Asian American community and prejudice on all sides, but focusing on that and and not working to repair those divisions is how white supremacy is winning and hurting us all. And we are threatening the system by sitting here today, you and I having this conversation. This is going against the design, and this is how we dismantle it.
I tell you what, we can only scratch the surface of this conversation, even with the time that we have allotted, which is quite a bit of time to be talking on local television. But Stephanie, briefly, can you please just talk about how can people get more involved, learn more, which we all need to do, as well as support the AAPI community?
There is so much education available now, and I would encourage people to do their own research and not always put it on your Asian American and people of color friends to educate you, because we are doing a lot of emotional labor and healing ourselves. But also check on your Asian American friends and family. We're hurting, we are grieving, and we are also in a pandemic and isolated. So checking in and also speaking up to say that you affirm us and that you do not condone these violent acts. And then you have to take it to a higher level, because we are part of a system, and there is proposed national COVID-19 hate crimes acts and similar bills that are happening locally. So urging your representatives.
Stephanie, I'm going to have to jump in here. I'm going to make sure that I share this interview and all of the links and information with folks, as well as the work that you're doing with your organization. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Thank you.